In August 1956, J. Edgar Hoover, the iron-fisted director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, quietly authorized a new covert program that would operate outside the law for the next 15 years. Its official name was COINTELPRO, Counterintelligence Program. On paper, it was created to protect national security by disrupting the American Communist Party. In reality, it would become the FBI's secret weapon against any domestic political movement Hoover considered a threat to his vision of America. The timing was deliberate. The Cold War was at its height. Fear of communism had already fueled McCarthyism. Hoover, who had built the modern FBI into a powerful and feared institution, saw an opportunity to expand the Bureau's authority far beyond traditional law enforcement. He wanted to neutralize enemies before they became dangerous, not through arrests and trials, but through covert disruption. The program began modestly. FBI field offices were instructed to increase surveillance on known Communist Party members, wiretaps, mail opening, informant infiltrations, and psychological operations. But the machinery Hoover created was flexible. Within a few years, the definition of threat would expand dramatically. By the early 1960s, as the civil rights movement gained momentum, Hoover's focus shifted. He became convinced that the growing demands for racial equality were not organic but manipulated by communist infiltrators. Martin Luther King Jr., in particular, drew Hoover's personal suspicion and hostility. The FBI director viewed King as a dangerous demagogue who threatened the social order. COINTELPRO's methods were cold and procedural. Agents were authorized to use any means necessary, legal or illegal, to neutralize targets. This included illegal wiretaps and bugging of homes and offices, infiltration with paid informants and provocateurs, anonymous letters and forged documents to sow distrust, leaking damaging information, real or fabricated, to friendly media contacts, cooperation with local police to harass and arrest targets on minor or false charges. These techniques were not rogue operations. They were formalized, reported upward through FBI chains of command, and often personally approved by Hoover himself. The director demanded regular progress reports on disruption efforts. Success was measured not by convictions in court, but by how effectively a group or individual had been discredited, divided, or neutralized. To the American public in the late 1950s and early 1960s, none of this existed. The FBI was still widely viewed as the heroic G-men who fought gangsters and protected the country from spies. Hoover cultivated this image carefully through Hollywood collaborations and friendly press relationships. While the public saw clean-cut agents chasing bank robbers, a parallel shadow operation was being built to wage war on American citizens exercising their constitutional rights. The birth of COINTELPRO marked a fundamental shift in the FBI's role. It moved from a law enforcement agency into a domestic political police force. Hoover had created a secret system that allowed the Bureau to punish thought, speech, and association without due process, and once created, this machinery would not remain limited to communists for long. It would soon be turned with full force against the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, and especially the rising Black Power organizations of the late 1960s. The machine was now running, and J. Edgar Hoover was personally at the controls. By 1963, J. Edgar Hoover's obsession with Martin Luther King Jr. had become one of the most intense personal vendettas in the history of American law enforcement. As the civil rights movement reached its peak with the March on Washington and King's "I Have a Dream" speech, Hoover became convinced that King represented a profound threat to national stability. Internal FBI memos described King as the most dangerous Negro in America. Hoover authorized the full arsenal of COINTELPRO techniques to be used against him and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC. The operation was methodical and illegal from the start. In October 1963, the FBI authorization for wiretaps on King's home and offices. Although technically approved by Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy under national security pretexts, the scope quickly expanded far beyond any legitimate intelligence purpose. Bugs were planted in hotel rooms where King stayed during his travels. The FBI recorded not only strategy meetings but also private, intimate conversations. Thousands of hours of surveillance were collected and transcribed. Hoover's goal was never prosecution in court, it was destruction. The FBI compiled detailed dossiers on King's personal life, searching for any material that could be used to discredit him. They focused heavily on alleged communist connections, repeatedly trying to link King's advisors, particularly Stanley Leviston, to the Communist Party. When evidence proved thin, the Bureau exaggerated and fabricated connections in internal reports and leaks to friendly journalists. Simultaneously, the FBI launched a coordinated smear campaign. Agents contacted newspaper editors, religious leaders, and politicians across the country, feeding them damaging information, much of it taken out of context or entirely false. They portrayed King as a moral hypocrite, a communist sympathizer, and a threat to American values. The goal was to erode his support among moderate whites and within the black community itself. One of the most chilling aspects of the operation was the Bureau's attempt to replace King with more compliant leadership. FBI documents explicitly discussed neutralizing King as the dominant voice of the civil rights movement and promoting alternative figures they believed they could control. To the American public, Martin Luther King Jr. was an inspiring moral leader fighting for justice through nonviolence. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964. While the nation celebrated his achievement, the FBI was intensifying its covert campaign to destroy his reputation and effectiveness. Hoover personally hated King. Declassified memos show the director's deep racial animus and paranoia. He viewed the entire civil rights movement not as a legitimate struggle for equality, but as a communist plot to destabilize the United States. This belief justified, in his mind, the use of any tactics necessary. The machinery of COINTELPRO had now locked onto its highest profile target. Wiretaps hummed, informants reported. Anonymous letters were prepared. The FBI's most sophisticated psychological warfare techniques were being refined and deployed against a peaceful American minister who simply demanded that the Constitution apply to all citizens. The public saw the dignified leader in a suit and tie. Behind the scenes, one of the most powerful men in Washington had declared war on him. And the campaign was about to get even darker. In late 1964, the FBI's campaign against Martin Luther King Jr. crossed into pure psychological warfare. After King was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in October 1964, J. Edgar Hoover's fury reached a new level. The Bureau intensified its surveillance and began preparing one of the most infamous operations in COINTELPRO history. In November 1964, the FBI anonymously mailed a carefully crafted package to Martin Luther King Jr.'s home in Atlanta. Inside was a reel-to-reel audio tape containing excerpts from the FBI's illegal recordings of King in hotel rooms, conversations and sounds the Bureau believed would destroy his moral authority. Accompanying the tape was an anonymous typed letter, written in the voice of a black citizen, that viciously attacked King's character. The letter was brutal and calculated. It called King a filthy, abnormal animal and accused him of moral depravity. Then came the final chilling paragraph. King, there is only one thing left for you to do. You know what it is. You have 34 days in which to do this exact thing before your filthy, abnormal, fraudulent self is bared to the nation. The implication was clear. The FBI was urging King to commit suicide. The 34-day deadline coincided with the date King was scheduled to receive the Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo. This was not the work of a single angry agent. The suicide letter was reviewed and approved at the highest levels of the FBI's Domestic Intelligence Division. Hoover was kept informed of the operation. It represented the purest expression of COINTELPRO's goal, not merely to monitor but to psychologically break and neutralize a target. The package was sent without a return address. The FBI hoped King's wife, Coretta Scott King, would open it first. They wanted to destroy King's marriage as well as his public image. When King received the tape, he and his advisors immediately suspected the FBI. King reportedly told close associates, "They are out to break me." This psychological attack was part of a broader pattern. The FBI continued to leak damaging stories to cooperative journalists. They tried to pressure religious leaders and universities to withdraw invitations and honors from King. They spread rumors about his personal life and financial dealings. Every tool of reputation destruction was deployed with cold bureaucratic efficiency. To the American public, Martin Luther King Jr. remained the dignified voice of the civil rights movement. While he delivered powerful speeches and led marches, the nation's most powerful law enforcement agency was secretly working to drive him to suicide and destroy his legacy. The suicide letter stands today as one of the darkest documented examples of government abuse against a private citizen in modern American history. It revealed how far COINTELPRO was willing to go, crossing from surveillance into outright character assassination and psychological terror. And even this was not the end of the FBI's campaign. The machinery of repression had evolved. From wiretaps to forged letters to psychological warfare, COINTELPRO was proving it could reach into every aspect of a target's life. Its focus would soon shift from destroying one man to crushing an entire movement. By 1967, J. Edgar Hoover had grown frustrated with the civil rights movement's shift toward economic justice and black empowerment. He saw a new, more dangerous threat rising: the Black Panther Party for self-defense. Founded in Oakland, California in 1966 by Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, the Panthers openly carried weapons, patrolled police activity in their communities, and delivered fiery rhetoric against police brutality and systemic racism. They also ran social programs, free breakfast for children, health clinics, and political education. To Hoover, this combination was explosive. He viewed the Panthers as the greatest threat to internal security since the Communist Party. In August 1967, Hoover officially expanded COINTELPRO to target black nationalist hate groups. The Black Panther Party became the primary focus. Internal FBI memos declared the goal was to prevent the coalition of militant black nationalist groups and to neutralize their leadership. The Bureau unleashed its full arsenal of covert tactics. Infiltration. Hundreds of FBI informants and provocateurs were inserted into Panther chapters across the country. Some rose to high positions, influencing decisions and sowing paranoia. Psychological warfare. The FBI forged letters and cartoons designed to create deadly rivalries between the Panthers and other black organizations, particularly the U.S. organization led by Ron Karenga. These forged documents led to actual violence and deaths between the groups. Media manipulation. Agents fed negative stories to friendly journalists, portraying the Panthers as violent thugs rather than a political organization. The goal was to turn public opinion against them and justify aggressive policing. Harassment through local police. The FBI shared intelligence with urban police departments and encouraged raids, often on flimsy or false pretenses. The disruption campaign was relentless. FBI documents from this period openly used the word neutralization, a term that went far beyond legitimate law enforcement. Agents were praised when Panther chapters were internally divided, financially strained, or had their leaders jailed or killed. By 1969, the Black Panther Party was under siege nationwide. Its leadership was constantly in court, in hiding, or in prison. The FBI's own records show they had over 7,000 informants inside black nationalist groups at the peak of operations. The Panthers, once growing rapidly, began to fracture under the weight of constant pressure, paranoia, and resource drain. What the American public saw was a narrative of violent radicals clashing with police. What they did not see was a coordinated, illegal federal program designed to destroy a political movement from within. The expansion to the Black Panthers marked COINTELPRO's most aggressive and violent phase. The tactics that had been used to harass Martin Luther King Jr. were now scaled up into a full-spectrum attack on an entire generation of young black activists. And in one city, this campaign would soon reach its deadliest expression. On the night of December 3, 1969, in a small apartment on Chicago's west side, 21-year-old Fred Hampton, chairman of the Illinois Black Panther Party, was sleeping. At 4:30 a.m. on December 4, a heavily armed team of 14 Chicago police officers, working in close coordination with the FBI, raided the apartment. What followed would become one of the most controversial and damning episodes in COINTELPRO history. The raid had been meticulously prepared. FBI informant William O'Neill, who had infiltrated the Chicago Panthers and risen to become Hampton's bodyguard and head of security, had provided detailed floor plans of the apartment, the sleeping arrangements, and crucially, the location where Hampton's bed was positioned. O'Neill had also allegedly drugged Hampton earlier that evening, with a barbiturate slipped into his drink, making him extremely difficult to wake. The police opened fire within seconds of entering. They shot over 90 rounds into the apartment. The Panthers inside fired back only a handful of times. Fred Hampton was shot multiple times while lying in bed. According to eyewitnesses and later ballistic evidence, he was hit first in the shoulder, then finished off with 2 shots to the head at close range while unconscious. His pregnant fiancée, Deborah Johnson, was in the bed beside him and survived only by pretending to be dead. Mark Clark, another Panther leader, was also killed in the initial barrage. In total, the police fired nearly 100 shots. The Panthers managed to fire only 1 or 2 rounds in response. The official police narrative was immediate and clear. The Panthers had opened fire on them without provocation, and the officers had acted in self-defense. Chicago officials praised the raid as a successful operation against dangerous militants. Behind the scenes, the FBI celebrated. Internal COINTELPRO documents later revealed that the Bureau had actively encouraged the raid, provided intelligence, and viewed Hampton's death as a major success in their neutralization campaign. Hampton had been a charismatic, effective leader who was successfully building coalitions between black, Puerto Rican, and poor white communities, exactly the kind of unity the FBI sought to prevent. The morning after the raid, police held a press conference displaying weapons allegedly seized from the apartment. Later investigations proved many of these weapons had been planted or staged for the cameras. Ballistic analysis eventually showed that of the nearly 100 shots fired by police, only 1 came from a Panther weapon, and it had been fired after the police assault had already begun. Fred Hampton was executed in his bed. The killing sent shockwaves through the black community and activist circles. Thousands attended Hampton's funeral, where his eulogy was delivered by civil rights icons. But the official cover story held for years. It was only through persistent investigation by journalists, the Panthers, and later the Church Committee that the full extent of FBI and local police collaboration was exposed. The Fred Hampton raid represented the lethal endpoint of COINTELPRO's logic. When disruption and psychological warfare were not enough, the machinery was willing to enable, and in some interpretations, orchestrate, the physical elimination of political threats. To the public in 1969, it was reported as another tragic shootout between police and radicals. The hidden reality was far darker. America's premier law enforcement agency had helped facilitate the assassination of a 21-year-old American citizen for the crime of organizing his people. In March 1971, a group of 8 ordinary American citizens, including a physics professor, a taxi driver, and several peace activists, did what the entire U.S. Congress and mainstream media had failed to do for 15 years. They broke into a small FBI field office in Media, Pennsylvania. On the night of March 8, 1971, while the nation was distracted by the Muhammad Ali versus Joe Frazier boxing match, the fight of the century, the group, who called themselves the Citizens Commission to investigate the FBI, carefully picked the lock of the FBI resident agency on the second floor of an office building. They worked quickly and quietly, removing every single file from the office and loading them into getaway cars. Among the thousands of documents they stole were secret COINTELPRO files. These were not routine reports. They contained explicit instructions on how the FBI was targeting political groups, forging letters, spreading lies through the media, and actively working to neutralize American citizens. One document in particular stood out, a memo from FBI headquarters in Washington ordering agents to enhance the paranoia in targeted groups and get the point across that there is an FBI agent behind every mailbox. The burglars did not sell the documents. They did not leak them for personal gain. Instead, they began anonymously mailing batches of the files to selected journalists and members of Congress. On March 24, 1971, the first major story based on the stolen files appeared in the Washington Post. Other newspapers followed. For the first time, the American public was given concrete, documentary proof that the FBI had been running a massive, illegal domestic surveillance and disruption program against its own citizens. J. Edgar Hoover was furious. The Bureau launched an unprecedented manhunt for the burglars, but the group had planned carefully and left almost no traces. To this day, most of the 8 remain unidentified. Their actions forced the FBI into damage control mode. The media burglary was the crack in the dam. It proved that COINTELPRO was real, that it was widespread, and that it had operated with complete disregard for the Constitution. The documents showed the program had targeted not just the Black Panthers and Martin Luther King Jr., but also anti-war groups, feminist organizations, student movements, and even mainstream civil rights figures. The exposure created immediate pressure. In 1975, the U.S. Senate formed the Church Committee to investigate intelligence abuses. What they uncovered over the next year would shock the nation and permanently damage the FBI's reputation. The 8 citizens who risked everything in Media, Pennsylvania, had succeeded where institutions had failed. Through one carefully executed burglary, they dragged one of America's most powerful secret programs into the daylight. The age of complete FBI impunity was ending. In 1975, the United States Senate finally turned its attention to the shadow war the FBI had been waging against its own citizens for nearly 2 decades. Following the media burglary and growing public pressure, the Senate Select Committee to study governmental operations with respect to intelligence activities, known as the Church Committee after its chairman, Senator Frank Church of Idaho, was established. What began as an investigation into intelligence overreach quickly became one of the most explosive congressional inquiries in modern American history. Over the course of 1975 and 1976, the committee reviewed more than 30,000 pages of FBI documents, interviewed agents and officials, and held public hearings that revealed the full scope of COINTELPRO for the first time. The revelations were staggering. The committee confirmed that COINTELPRO had operated in total secrecy, without warrants, without judicial oversight, and without any regard for the constitutional rights of American citizens. The FBI had targeted not only extremists, but peaceful civil rights leaders, anti-war activists, religious groups, and student organizations. The program had used every dirty trick available: forged documents, anonymous smear letters, illegal wiretaps, burglaries, and the use of provocateurs to incite violence. Particularly damaging were the findings regarding Martin Luther King Jr. The committee documented the FBI's years-long effort to destroy him, including the infamous suicide letter. They revealed that Hoover had personally ordered intensified surveillance after King's "I Have a Dream" speech and had attempted to prevent him from receiving the Nobel Peace Prize. On the Black Panther Party, the committee found that the FBI had contributed to a climate of violence through infiltration and disinformation. While direct responsibility for specific deaths remained complex, the Bureau's role in creating deadly rivalries and encouraging aggressive local police actions was undeniable. The Fred Hampton case was highlighted as a particularly disturbing example of intelligence sharing that led to lethal results. In April 1976, the Church Committee released its final report on COINTELPRO. The language was unusually harsh for a congressional document. It stated, The FBI conducted a sophisticated vigilante operation aimed squarely at preventing the exercise of First Amendment rights of speech and association, on the theory that preventing the growth of dangerous groups and the propagation of dangerous ideas would protect the national security and deter violence. The committee concluded that COINTELPRO was a clear violation of both the letter and spirit of the Constitution. It had transformed the FBI from a law enforcement agency into a secret political police force. The public hearings, broadcast on national television, shocked many Americans. For the first time, they saw internal FBI memos using words like neutralize, disrupt, and destroy when referring to American citizens. The carefully cultivated image of the FBI as honorable protectors of justice was permanently tarnished. J. Edgar Hoover had died in 1972, just before the full exposure. Many of his top lieutenants were forced to testify. The Bureau could no longer hide behind national security. The machinery of repression had finally been dragged into the light. The Church Committee's work would lead to significant reforms, at least on paper. New guidelines were issued to limit domestic surveillance. Congressional oversight was strengthened. But the deeper question remained: could an agency with such power and secrecy ever be truly restrained? The exposure of COINTELPRO did not destroy the FBI. It forced the agency into a new era of public scrutiny and partial reform. J. Edgar Hoover died in May 1972, just months before the media burglary documents began surfacing. By the time the Church Committee finished its work in 1976, the Bureau's most notorious domestic warfare program had officially ended. New guidelines, known as the Levi Guidelines, were implemented to restrict political surveillance. Congressional oversight was strengthened. For a time, the FBI appeared to have been brought back under greater democratic control. Yet the full truth remained fragmented. Many operational files had been destroyed. Most agents involved faced no punishment. No one went to prison for the illegal wiretaps, the psychological warfare, or the climate of violence they helped create. The machinery had been exposed, but it had not been dismantled. What really happened? From 1956 to 1971, the FBI under J. Edgar Hoover ran a secret illegal program called COINTELPRO that targeted American citizens for their political beliefs. The Bureau illegally spied on Martin Luther King Jr., sent him a letter encouraging suicide, spread lies through the media, infiltrated the Black Panther Party, forged documents to incite violence between black groups, and contributed to the deadly environment that led to the assassination of Fred Hampton. What was the public told at the time? Americans were told the FBI was protecting the country from dangerous radicals and communists. Hoover was portrayed as a national hero keeping America safe during turbulent times. The public had no idea their own government was waging a covert war against peaceful civil rights leaders and constitutionally protected political activity. What evidence contradicted the official narrative? Over 30,000 pages of internal FBI documents released through the Church Committee, including Hoover's own memos, the suicide letter to MLK, infiltration reports, forged documents, and explicit orders to neutralize targets. The media burglary files provided undeniable primary source proof. What mechanisms allowed the truth to stay hidden for so long? Absolute secrecy, unlimited classification power, lack of judicial warrants, collaboration with local police, media manipulation, and Hoover's iron grip over the Bureau for nearly 50 years. The absence of meaningful congressional oversight created a perfect environment for abuse. What should we learn from this case today? COINTELPRO remains one of the clearest warnings in American history about what happens when a powerful intelligence agency is allowed to operate in darkness with no real accountability. It proved that the greatest threat to civil liberties can sometimes come not from foreign enemies, but from the very institutions created to protect them. The tactics may have changed, from physical infiltration to digital surveillance, but the underlying temptation remains. When those in power fear losing control, they will often choose repression over persuasion. The program targeted those demanding racial justice, economic fairness, and an end to war. It treated the Constitution as an obstacle rather than a sacred limit on government power. Today, as surveillance technology grows more sophisticated and new threats are constantly redefined, the lessons of COINTELPRO are more relevant than ever. Once a government learns it can punish ideas, monitor dissent, and destroy reputations without consequence, it rarely forgets how. Fred Hampton never reached his 22nd birthday. Martin Luther King Jr. was driven to the edge of despair by his own government. Thousands of Americans had their lives quietly ruined for the crime of believing too strongly in change. The files are now public. The warning is clear. Never again should any agency be allowed to become a political police force operating above the law, because when secrecy replaces accountability, democracy itself becomes the target.